While sitting in the hospital waiting room, my dad said, "Don't expect me to pay for your mistakes." The fluorescent lights in the emergency room waiting area made everything look sickly yellow, including my dad's face as he stared at the insurance forms in his lap. I'd been sitting there for 3 hours with a dislocated shoulder and what felt like broken ribs, waiting for someone to call my name, when he finally looked up from the paperwork and said it. "Don't expect me to pay for your mistakes." The accident had happened at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the exact time because I was staring at my phone when the other car ran the red light and T-boned my Honda Civic on the driver's side. The impact sent my car spinning across the intersection and into a light pole. The airbag deployed, but my shoulder got wrenched out of its socket when the car rolled. I woke up hanging upside down with blood running into my eyes and my left arm hanging at a weird angle. The paramedics had to cut me out of the car with the jaws of life. They kept asking me questions about my name and what day it was while they loaded me onto a stretcher. I gave them my dad's number as my emergency contact because he was still on my insurance. At 23, I was technically an adult, but I'd been living at home since graduating college 6 months earlier, trying to save money for my own place while working at a marketing firm downtown. What I didn't know at the time was that the other driver had fled the scene. The police found his car abandoned 4 blocks away with the front end smashed in and the license plate missing. By the time they tracked down the owner through the VIN number, Marcus Rodriguez had already called in a stolen vehicle report claiming someone had taken his car from a convenience store parking lot. His story was that he'd gone inside to buy cigarettes and came out to find his 2019 Silverado gone. The investigating officer, Detective Patricia Mullins, told me all this when she came to take my statement in the emergency room. She explained that without witnesses or camera footage from the intersection, it would be difficult to prove Rodriguez was driving at the time of the accident. The convenience store's security cameras showed him going inside at 2:23 a.m., but there was a gap in coverage for the parking lot area where he claimed the theft occurred. So basically, he gets away with it, I said, trying not to move my shoulder as the nurse adjusted my sling. Detective Mullins shrugged. "We're still investigating, but without physical evidence putting him behind the wheel, the DA probably won't file charges." That's when the financial reality started sinking in. My car was totaled. The ambulance ride cost $1,800. The emergency room visit was already at $4,200 and climbing with every x-ray and CT scan they ordered. My health insurance had a 3-0 deductible that I definitely didn't have in my savings account. My car insurance would cover the vehicle replacement, but they wanted to pursue Rodriguez's insurance company for the medical bills and property damage. The problem was Rodriguez's insurance company, Reliable Auto Coverage, immediately denied the claim based on his theft report. Their adjuster, Beverly Chen, explained over the phone that they couldn't pay for damages caused by someone stealing their insured's vehicle. My insurance company, State Farm, said they'd fight it, but the process could take months or even years if it went to court. In the meantime, my agent Karen Wu told me, "You're responsible for the medical bills under your health insurance policy." That's where my dad came in. 3 days after the accident, I was still staying at his house because my shoulder was immobilized and I couldn't drive. The medical bills were arriving daily in thick envelopes. The orthopedic surgeon wanted $6,800 for the shoulder surgery I'd need in 2 weeks. The radiologist billed $900 for reading my scans. The hospital sent a preliminary bill for $12,400 that didn't even include the surgery. $23,000, my dad said, spreading the bills across the kitchen table. "That's what your mistakes are going to cost so far." "It wasn't my fault," I said. "The guy ran a red light. You were out at 3 in the morning on a work night. What were you doing?" I'd been coming home from my friend Sarah's apartment after helping her move some furniture. It had taken longer than expected, and I was tired, but I wasn't drunk or distracted. Just in the wrong place at the wrong time when Rodriguez decided to blow through that intersection. "Helping a friend move," I told him. "At 3 in the morning? Come on, Jake, tell me the truth." "That is the truth." He stared at me for a long moment, then started stacking the bills into a neat pile. "Well, truth or not, I'm not paying for this. You're an adult. You made the decision to be out driving around in the middle of the night. These are the consequences." The next week, things got worse. The orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Amanda Torres, examined my shoulder and explained that the dislocation had torn my labrum and damaged some cartilage. Without surgery, I'd have chronic instability and pain. With surgery, I'd need 4 to 6 months of physical therapy and might still have permanent limitations. "How much will it cost?" I asked. "The surgery itself is $6,800, but that doesn't include the anesthesiologist, the facility fee, or the follow-up appointments. Altogether, you're looking at around $15,000 for the whole treatment." I felt sick. Even with insurance covering 70% after the deductible, I'd still owe thousands, and that was assuming Rodriguez's insurance didn't eventually pay up. Dr. Torres scheduled the surgery for the following Thursday. I had to get pre-authorization from my insurance company and coordinate with the billing department about payment arrangements. The hospital wanted a 4-0 deposit before they do the procedure. "I don't have $4,000, I told the financial counselor, Lisa Brennan. "Do you have family who can help? We have payment plans, but we need something up front for a surgery this expensive." I called my dad from the parking lot outside the hospital. "I need to borrow $4,000 for the surgery deposit." "No, Dad, I can't use my arm. I need this surgery, or I'll have permanent damage." "You should have thought about that before you were out joyriding at 3 in the morning." "I wasn't joyriding. I was helping a friend. Whatever you were doing, it was your choice. I'm not enabling your poor decisions by paying for the consequences." That evening, I tried explaining the situation to my mom, hoping she could talk some sense into him. My parents had been divorced for 8 years, and she lived in Phoenix with her new husband. She listened while I described the accident and the mounting bills. "Your father's always been stubborn about money," she said, "but $20,000 is a lot, even for him. Have you looked into other options? Like what? Medical loans, maybe? Or see if the hospital has charity care programs?" I spent the next 2 days researching every option I could find. The hospital did have a financial assistance program, but you had to prove you couldn't afford the bills based on your income and assets. As someone living at home with a decent job, I didn't qualify for much help. Medical loans were available through companies like Care Credit, but the interest rates were brutal. 24% APR for anything over 2.0. I'd be paying hundreds of dollars a month for years. The surgery got postponed when I couldn't come up with the the deposit. Dr. Torres's scheduler, Nancy Kim, was sympathetic but firm. We can reschedule once you have the financial arrangements sorted out, but don't wait too long. The longer you wait, the harder it becomes to repair the damage. My boss at the marketing firm, David Chen, was understanding about the time I'd needed off, but he started asking questions when I couldn't give him a return date. How long is this recovery supposed to take? He asked during a check-in call. 4 to 6 months once I have the surgery, but I'm having trouble with the insurance situation. We need to know your timeline, Jake. We've been covering your accounts, but we can't do it indefinitely. The pressure was building from every direction. My shoulder hurt constantly, especially at night. I couldn't lift anything heavier than a coffee cup. Simple tasks like getting dressed or showering were exhausting, and every day I waited, the bills kept coming. The emergency room sent a final notice, threatening to send my account to collections if I didn't set up a payment plan within 30 days. The ambulance company did the same thing. Even the radiologist who'd read my x-rays was demanding payment. I tried one more time with my dad. This time, I brought documentation. Copies of the police report, the insurance correspondence, the medical records, everything that proved the accident wasn't my fault and that I was genuinely injured. Look at this, I said, spreading the papers across his dining room table. The other driver fled the scene. He lied to his insurance company about the car being stolen. This isn't about poor decisions or consequences. This is about getting hit by someone who broke the law and then tried to cover it up. My dad glanced at the papers but didn't pick any of them up. You still haven't explained what you were doing out at 3 in the morning. I told you, helping Sarah move. Sarah who? Where does she live? Why was she moving at that hour? I realized he thought I was lying about something. Maybe he suspected I'd been drinking, or that I'd been somewhere I shouldn't have been. The truth was simpler and stupider than whatever he was imagining. Sarah Martinez from college. She got a new job in Denver and had to be out of her apartment by the 1st of the month. Her lease ended on Monday night, technically Tuesday morning. We'd been packing all weekend, but there were still a few big pieces of furniture left. I offered to help her get them to the U-Haul because she couldn't lift them herself. At 3 in the morning, the U-Haul place opened at 6 a.m. Tuesday. She had to drive 12 hours to Denver to start her new job Wednesday. We were trying to get everything loaded so she could leave first thing in the morning. Why didn't you just help her earlier? Because I worked Monday until 7, and by the time I got to her place, we were already behind schedule. Look, I know it sounds weird, but that's what happened. I have her phone number if you want to call her. He didn't respond to that, just sat there looking at the police report with a skeptical expression. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Detective Mullins with an update on the case. A witness had come forward. Maria Santos, who lived in an apartment building overlooking the intersection, had been unable to sleep and was looking out her window when the accident happened. She'd seen the whole thing, including Rodriguez running the red light and speeding away from the scene afterward. Why didn't she call it in before? I asked. She was afraid to get involved, but when she saw the story about the stolen car report in the newspaper, she realized the driver was lying. Her conscience got the better of her. The witness statement changed everything. Rodriguez's insurance company, faced with eyewitness testimony that their insured was driving at the time of the accident, reversed their denial. They accepted liability and agreed to cover all my medical bills and property damage. The news should have been a relief, but by then, other problems had developed. My employer had been patient, but after a month of uncertainty, they'd had to make a decision about my position. David Chen called on a Friday afternoon to deliver the news. We're not firing you exactly, he said, but we need to fill your role permanently. When you're ready to come back, we'll see if there are other openings. So I'm laid off. It's more of a voluntary resignation due to medical leave. You'll be eligible for unemployment benefits. Losing my job meant losing my health insurance. I had 18 months of Cobra coverage available, but it would cost $340 a month, money I definitely didn't have. The irony was bitter. Just as Rodriguez's insurance company agreed to pay for my medical care, I lost the health insurance that had been covering it in the meantime. The hospital billing department, Lisa Brennan, explained that I'd need to resubmit everything through Rodriguez's auto insurance, which could take weeks or months to process. In the meantime, you're still responsible for the charges, she said. Auto insurance companies are notoriously slow to pay medical bills. I was caught in a bureaucratic nightmare. My health insurance had paid some of the initial bills, but they wanted reimbursement from the auto insurance. The auto insurance was willing to pay, but they needed detailed medical records and itemized billing that would take time to compile. The hospital wanted payment immediately, regardless of who was ultimately responsible. The stress was making my shoulder worse. Dr. Torres explained that anxiety and muscle tension were interfering with my healing. She prescribed muscle relaxers and recommended I see a therapist to help cope with the trauma of the accident and its aftermath. How much does therapy cost? I asked. With your insurance, probably $30 to $50 per session. I don't have insurance anymore. She looked genuinely surprised. What happened? I explained about losing my job and the Cobra situation. She made some notes in my chart and said she'd see if there were any community mental health resources available. That weekend, my dad brought up the subject again. We were watching a baseball game on TV when he muted the sound during a commercial break. I talked to Rodriguez's insurance company, he said. I looked at him in surprise. You called them? I wanted to understand the situation better. They confirmed they'll be paying your medical bills, but it could take 6 to 8 weeks to process everything. Okay. They also said they'll cover lost wages while you're recovering. This was news to me. How much? 70% of your salary up to a certain limit should be enough to cover your basic expenses. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. If Rodriguez's insurance covered my lost wages, I might be able to afford the Cobra payments and keep my health insurance active. There's a catch though, my dad continued. You have to prove you're actively seeking medical treatment and following your doctor's recommendations. If you delay the surgery much longer, they might argue you're not mitigating your damages. Dr. Torres had been saying the same thing. The longer I waited, the more complicated the repair would become. Scar tissue was already forming around the torn labrum. I called Rodriguez's insurance company, Reliable Auto Coverage, the next morning. The claims adjuster, Beverly Chen, confirmed what my dad had said about wage replacement, but she was less optimistic about the timeline for medical bill payments. We need all the documentation from your health insurance company showing what they've paid so far, she explained. Then we have to review each charge to make sure it's related to the accident and reasonable for the type of treatment you received. It's a thorough process. How thorough? Every bill gets reviewed by a medical case manager and sometimes an independent medical examiner. If If there are any questions about whether a treatment was necessary or appropriate, it goes to additional review. What kind of questions? For example, if you had physical therapy for 6 months, we might want to verify that length of treatment was medically necessary. Or if you had multiple MRI scans, we'd want to understand why. I was starting to understand why my dad had been skeptical about the whole situation. Even with a clear liability determination, getting the insurance company to actually pay the bills would be a long, complicated process. The surgery finally happened 6 weeks after the accident. Dr. Torres had to work around more scar tissue than she'd anticipated, which made the procedure longer and more complex. What should have been outpatient surgery turned into an overnight stay when I had a bad reaction to the anesthesia. The additional complications meant more bills. The anesthesiologist charged extra for the extended procedure time. The hospital added facility fees for the overnight stay. A pulmonologist had to be called in when my oxygen levels dropped in recovery. 2 days after the surgery, I got a call from Reliable Auto Coverage informing me that they were opening a special investigation unit review of my claim. What does that mean? I asked Beverly Chen. It means we need to do additional verification before approving payment. The total medical expenses have exceeded $50,000, which triggers an automatic SIU review. What kind of verification? We'll be sending an investigator to interview you about the accident and your medical treatment. We'll also be requesting your complete medical records for the past 5 years to make sure all your current treatment is related to the accident and not pre-existing conditions. The investigator, Robert Hayes, came to my dad's house 3 weeks later. He was a former police officer in his 50s who worked for a company that specialized in insurance fraud investigations. He spent 2 hours asking detailed questions about the accident, my injuries, and my medical history. Have you ever had shoulder problems before? He asked. No. Any sports injuries? Gym accidents? Falls? Nothing involving my shoulder. What about your back? I see you've been treated for back pain. I had seen a chiropractor a few times the previous year for some stiffness after moving apartments, but nothing serious. Just some minor soreness from lifting heavy boxes. It went away after a few adjustments. Hayes made notes about everything. He asked for the names and addresses of all my doctors, including the chiropractor. He wanted to know about my job duties, my hobbies, my exercise routine. He even asked about my relationship status and living arrangements. Why does that matter? I asked. We need to understand your lifestyle and activities to verify that your current limitations are consistent with the injuries you sustained. The investigation dragged on for months. Hayes interviewed Sarah Martinez about the night of the accident. He talked to my former coworkers about my job performance and any previous injuries. He even spoke to my ex-girlfriend from college about whether I'd ever complained about shoulder pain. Meanwhile, the bills kept accumulating. Physical therapy cost $180 per session, 3 times a week. Follow-up appointments with Dr. Torres were $320 each. The muscle relaxers and pain medications added another $200 a month. Reliable Auto Coverage was supposed to be covering these ongoing expenses, but they put everything on hold pending the SIU investigation. My health insurance, which I'd managed to keep active through Cobra, was paying initially, but they wanted confirmation that the auto insurance would reimburse them. The financial pressure was crushing. My unemployment benefits were $280 a week, barely enough to cover my basic expenses even living at my dad's house. The Cobra payments alone were eating up most of my unemployment check. 8 months after the accident, Hayes completed his investigation. Reliable Auto Coverage scheduled a conference call to discuss the findings. Beverly Chen, the claims adjuster, had been replaced by a more senior adjuster named Michael Park. He explained that the SIU had found some concerning discrepancies in my case. The investigator noted that you had previous chiropractic treatment for back pain, Park said. Your current physical therapy includes back strengthening exercises, which suggests a pre-existing condition. The back pain was completely unrelated, I protested. It was just muscle stiffness from moving furniture. The chiropractor's records indicate you complained of pain radiating into your left shoulder. I tried to remember the details from over a year earlier. I'd seen Dr. Peterson maybe 4 times for some tightness between my shoulder blades. Nothing like the severe injury I'd sustained in the accident. Even if that's true, it was minor and completely resolved. Our medical consultant reviewed your treatment records and believes some of your current symptoms may be related to this pre-existing condition rather than the motor vehicle accident. That's ridiculous. I dislocated my shoulder and tore my labrum. That's documented with MRI scans. The labral tear is consistent with the accident. However, some of your ongoing pain and the duration of your physical therapy suggest contributing factors beyond the acute injury. What they were saying was that they'd pay for the immediate treatment related to the accident, but not the ongoing care. They'd cover the emergency room visit, the surgery, and the first few weeks of physical therapy. Everything after that, they were attributing to pre-existing conditions. The financial implications were devastating. Of the $67,000 in total medical bills, they were only accepting responsibility for about $35,000. That left me personally responsible for $32,000, not counting the ongoing costs of treatment. This is insane, I told my dad after the conference call. They're trying to get out of paying by claiming my sore back from last year is somehow related to a dislocated shoulder. He was reading through the SIU report Hayes had prepared. It says here you told different doctors different things about your pain levels and symptoms because I was on pain medication half the time and could barely think straight. You told the emergency room, doctor, your pain was an 8 out of 10, but you told the orthopedic surgeon it was a 6. So what? Pain levels fluctuate depending on medication, time of day, what activities I'd been doing, but I could see the doubt creeping into his expression. The insurance company had done exactly what they were supposed to do from a business perspective. They'd found enough ambiguity in my medical history and treatment records to justify reducing their payout by nearly half. The next phase was litigation. My lawyer, Patricia Wolf, explained that I could sue Rodriguez directly for the damages his insurance company wouldn't cover. But that process could take 2 to 3 years, and there was no guarantee Rodriguez had assets worth pursuing. What kind of assets? I asked. Bank accounts, real estate, investment accounts. If he doesn't have significant assets, winning a judgment against him might be meaningless. What about garnishing his wages? That's possible if he's employed and earning enough to make it worthwhile. But first, we have to win the case, and the insurance company will fight hard to limit their insured's exposure. The legal fees would be substantial. Wolf worked on contingency, meaning she'd take a percentage of any settlement or judgment, but I'd still be responsible for court costs, expert witness fees, and other expenses. A year and a half after the accident, I was worse off than when it started. My shoulder had healed enough that I could use it normally, but I still had chronic pain and stiffness. I'd found a new job at a smaller marketing firm, but it paid 80 less than my previous position. The medical bills had damaged my credit score to the point where I couldn't qualify for an apartment lease. I was still living at my dad's house, paying him $400 a month in rent, sleeping in my old bedroom like I was still in high school. The relationship with my dad never fully recovered. He'd been technically correct that Rodriguez's insurance would eventually cover most of the bills, but his refusal to help during the crisis had forced me into financial decisions that had long-term consequences. The bankruptcy attorney, James Mueller, explained that Chapter 7 would eliminate the medical debt but would stay on my credit report for 10 years. Given your age and income prospects, it might be worth taking the hit now rather than struggling with these payments indefinitely. How much are we talking about? About $28,000 in medical debt, plus the attorney fees and court costs from your lawsuit. Call it $32,000 total. Filing for bankruptcy felt like admitting defeat, but the alternative was making minimum payments on medical debt for the next 15 years. The monthly payments on that much debt, even at a low interest rate, would be close to $400. What about my car loan and student loans? Car loan survives if you keep making payments. Student loans can't be discharged in bankruptcy, except in very limited circumstances. So I'd emerge from bankruptcy with a destroyed credit score, but still owing 23,000 in student loans and needing to find a car since my Honda had been totaled in the accident. The final settlement with Rodriguez's insurance company came 18 months after the accident. They agreed to pay an additional 12,000 to avoid the uncertainty of a trial, bringing their total payout to 47,000. After lawyer fees and medical liens, I received about 80. It was enough to buy a used car and put a deposit on a small apartment across town. Not enough to avoid bankruptcy, but enough to start rebuilding my life with some dignity intact. The last conversation I had with my dad about the whole situation was when I was moving out of his house. He helped me load my furniture into the rental truck, and we worked in relative silence for most of the morning. I know you think I was too hard on you, he said as we finished securing everything with rope. You were, maybe, but you needed to learn that actions have consequences, even when those actions aren't really your fault. What does that even mean? Life isn't fair, Jake. Bad things happen to good people all the time. The question is what you do about it. Do you take responsibility for solving your problems, or do you wait for someone else to fix things for you? I wanted to argue that helping your kid through a crisis isn't the same as enabling poor decisions, but I was tired of fighting about it. The damage was done. I'd learned to handle problems on my own, but I'd also learned that I couldn't count on my family when things got really bad. 2 years later, I ran into Detective Mullins at a coffee shop downtown. She remembered the case and asked how everything had turned out. Rodriguez ended up pleading guilty to leaving the scene of an accident, she said. Got 6 months probation and a suspended license. His insurance company paid out eventually, right? Most of it. That's something at least. A lot of these hit-and-run cases never get resolved. She was right. Rodriguez had faced some consequences, and I'd recovered physically from my injuries. The insurance system had worked well enough to prevent complete financial ruin, even if it hadn't been perfect. But the lesson I learned from the whole experience wasn't about personal responsibility or the importance of good insurance coverage. It was about how quickly everything you think you can count on can disappear when you really need it. Your job, your health insurance, your family's support, even your own body's ability to heal properly, all of it can vanish in the time it takes for someone to run a red light and drive away. The safety net you think exists mostly doesn't, and the people you assume will help you might choose that moment to teach you a lesson about self-reliance instead. 3 years later, my credit score had recovered enough to qualify for a decent apartment and a car loan. The physical therapy had worked well enough that I rarely thought about my shoulder unless the weather was changing. I had a better job with good insurance and enough savings to handle minor emergencies, but I never forgot the feeling of sitting in that hospital waiting room, hurt and scared, and facing thousands of dollars in bills, listening to my dad explain why he wouldn't help me pay for my mistakes. Even though it turned out he was partially right about the insurance company eventually covering most of the costs, his refusal to help during the crisis had changed something fundamental between us. We still talked occasionally and saw each other at holidays, but the trust was gone. I'd learned that when things got really bad, I was on my own. It was probably a valuable lesson in the long run, but it came at a price I was still paying years later. The experience taught me to maintain better emergency funds, to understand my insurance coverage more thoroughly, and to be skeptical of anyone's promises about what they'll do to help in a crisis. But it also taught me to be the kind of person who helps others when they're in trouble, rather than using their crisis as an opportunity to teach lessons about personal responsibility. Sometimes people need help first and lectures later. Sometimes they just need help, period. And sometimes the difference between helping someone and teaching them a lesson is the difference between a family that stays together through hardship and one that never quite recovers from the damage.